I'm excited about you being here and being part of this. Same names occur quite a bit in my family. And so I want to be able to talk about that to you to figure out, what do you do when you have two individuals of the same name that are in the same location? How do you go about finding out which one is actually yours? So with that, let's move forward. Today, what I'm going to talk about is about knowing the name. And that's really not enough, just having a name. And we'll talk about some of the hints that you might use to better be able to understand the name. We're going to then take two different cases. One is from Mississippi and one is from Ohio. And I'm going to show you some steps I used in both of those cases for the purposes of comparison. And then I'll put some final thoughts together at the very end, and then we'll have time for question and answer. So this is a picture from one of my families, the Slack family. It was taken in the early 1900s, and it's a great picture, but there's actually the name John Slack in this picture in 4 different places. Fortunately, several of them are across different generations, but it was a very popular name, the John name within the Slack family. And so it's a name that we've had to distinguish different individuals, and many of them named one of their sons John after the grandfather of the family, who's seated right up front. So knowing who your person is, knowing their name is really not enough. You need to know their location and also when they lived and when they were there. Sometimes looking at handwriting will help you not only to inform on the literacy of the individual person, but it also can help you distinguish amongst individuals of the same name. In my husband's family, which is out of North Carolina, there are 3 William Richardsons at the same time in Nash County. Each one is purchasing land. The good news is only one could form his name and write it. He was the only one that had been educated. The other 2 individuals each used marks. One used a sideways number 8. Another one used a cross. And so once I discovered the handwriting and what they were using, it was pretty easy then to distinguish amongst the different deeds to be able to find who was doing what in terms of the land. Think about the family structure: the wife, the husband, the children, the parents, the siblings. Often the naming structure across that might be similar, man to man to man within a family, but something's going to be different. And so once you understand each person's family structure, you can start to see some trends, and we'll go through that as part of one of the cases. And finally, don't forget the community, the friends, the neighbors, and the associates. People have a tendency to migrate together. People have a tendency to move to a new location, and they do that with their friends and their family. And so once you have those, it becomes important. Now, just to give you a sense why this talk for me is so important, is because in my family, we seem to do really well with having many names over and over again. You can see I have 4 Rebecca Kings. That's not really that much, but you can see 3 of them were born 1810, 1818, and 1835. And the biggest difficulty is the one that died in 1889 versus the one that died in 1893, especially because they lived near each other in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. And so there's a lot of confusion amongst those 2 women. I have 22 John Kings in my tree. You're seeing just the first 10. And one of the things that I've done to help me remember who's who in a tree, you'll see John Wheelwright and you'll see John Tanner. The middle names were not the given names. The middle names were actually their occupations. That's how we got to know them, through their taxes and how they were listed. And it helped to be able to distinguish not only generations, but the kinds of jobs that they had. And finally, I also have 16 Jacob Yoders. Again, you're only seeing 10 of them here, but you can get accustomed to the fact that I've had experience having to distinguish these individuals. So let's start with a case. This is a case that I did for a client. It takes place in Mississippi. And the question really becomes, is the brother of Peter Crum a man by the name of Elias or a man by the name of Eli? This becomes a little bit more difficult as you're looking at it because it takes place in Tippah County. And Tippah County was originally Chickasaw territory. It was formed in 1836, and Ripley was named the county seat a year later. The original log courthouse was then replaced in another year by a brick structure, but unfortunately it was burned in 1864. Do you start to understand why this is difficult? Then a new courthouse was built in 1870 and renovated in 1928. So we immediately go into this knowing, depending on the era that we're working in, whether or not we're going to have trouble with this search based on information. So the first thing I always do, whether I'm working with a client or even on my own research, is I go back when I'm working specifically on a brick wall or a difficult situation to individuals of the same name. I want to review what I've done so far. I fortunately have learned over the years to use research logs, but I know a lot of people don't. You need to know that even if you haven't, you need to create one as you're doing the research on two individuals of the same name, because it's going to help you figure out whether the information you got is truly related to the person that you're looking for, or is it related to another individual. So that's a great way. Review your research and create a log. And then you want to come up with a specific research question. I always do this because it's beneficial not only to me, but it's also beneficial for me to be able to show somebody else what I'm researching for. In this case, you always want to make sure you're specifying the individual as well as you can, their location that they're living in, and the dates that they are related to. If I do my job well enough writing a research question, I should be able to hand it off to anyone that does genealogy research, and they should be able to go after that question for me. In this case, my question was, which Eliah or Elias Crum in the 1840 census in Tippah County, Mississippi, is the brother to Peter Crum, who is also in the 1840 census? There was a family story that Peter and his two brothers, Elias and Hiram, moved from Tennessee to Mississippi. I needed to be able to see if I could prove the Elias Crum first as a potential brother. So what I did to get started is I did exactly what I told you. I reviewed what I already knew, and I had done a research project on Peter Crum. You will see that Crum is spelled, even on this page, 3 different ways: one with a B, one with an E, and one with neither, depending on the record, depending on how they were spelling his last name. But in June 1830, I knew that Peter was in Hardeman, Tennessee. He was the head of household. He was 20 to 29. There was an assumption, and I think it's a correct one, that the female was probably his wife. And you can guess that potentially maybe the male under 5 would have been him and the female 5 to 9. But the male 15 to 19 sticks out, okay? That might be a brother. It might not be either. And they had a neighbor, Joseph Kennedy, amongst other neighbors, but that one comes into play specifically with this. In May 1839, Elias and Peter, with an E on the end, both bought land. They both bought it in range 5, but in 2 different locations, and I'll show you that in a second. In 1840, Peter Crum is listed as a senior. There's 8 males in his house and 4 females, and his neighbor is Joseph Kennedy. And finally, in 1841, in the state census, on the same page, there is a Peter, an Elias, and a Hiram all together. The Elias that is there has 2 males and 2 females. So at this point, we're trying to figure out about Elias. In this case, you can see the land. Up at the top and down at the bottom are the 2 pieces of land that Peter and Elias, spelled with an E, purchased in 1839. They are not next door to each other. they are a few miles away. But it's important to understand and use maps to be able to understand what you're doing with the land. When I look at the 1840 census, there is an Elias Crum, spelled with a B, who is 20 to 29. He has a male under 5, a female 20 to 29, a female under 5, and there are 4 in his household. On line 11 in page 207, there's an Eli Crum, also spelled with a B. He's 30 to 39. He has a male under 5, a female 20 to 29, and a female 5 to 9. Very similar households of 4 people. And Peter Crum was on page 190. So he's 5 pages away from the one and 17 pages from the other. But this isn't really helping me yet figure out which one is the right individual. Moving on to the 1850 census, when we start to list names, you can see that Elias Crann, C-R-A-N-N, age 40, who is originally from Kentucky, is listed in Division 3 on page 522. He has a proposed wife of 37 and then children, Peter, Melissa, Ann, Nancy, Elizabeth, and Hiram. Thinking that maybe this may be the right person because of the children, Peter and Hiram, but it's still not proof. It's just I can make a hypothesis. The other Eli Crum was from North Carolina. He was 45, a probable wife of Rachel and son of William. You can see that Peter was very clearly listed as a Cram, C-R-A-M, and that was not a Cran, that was a Cram, on page 493. So once again, we have 3 individuals. We're still not seeing any relationship, but I know that there probably is some relationship. So I went to land records, and what was interesting is Elias Crum in Township 3 and Range 5 had 4 land records that occurred in the 1838 to 1850 period of time. The interesting one is the third one, that on December 1846, he and Fanny, which was his wife, sold to Hiram Crum land, and it was listed as a gift at a lower level. In other words, the word gift was used, but there was still money exchanged. What was most interesting about this is he sold everything except for the cemetery located in the center of the property. That was going to remain under the name of Elias. They mentioned that they had several children that were already buried there, and there was land for Elias and Fanny to be buried. It makes you believe that Hiram is probably a brother, because to keep back and to get somebody to buy that land, leaving the cemetery free, probably means that Elias and Fanny, Elias is the brother of Hiram. Eli Crum, you can see, purchased land in another location, T5, Township 5, Range 5, but still nearby, but not direct. When you take a look at the land that he bought and sold during this period of time and plot it, you're going to see that the original 2, and most of this other land is here on number 5. Now, I colored a line down this, not very clearly, so that you could see better, because this is a waterway from Peter's land on down the waterway, down near where Elias. And that waterway becomes more prevalent as we go through additional records. I also looked at the tax records. I was having trouble finding records in TIPA. The tax records are at the state. You have to spend time and go through them. And the chart is just on the Elias, spelled I-A-S, Crum. And that is how his name was spelled in the tax records. And you can see across between 1839 and 1855, he is located very close to Peter Crum in almost each case. And in some cases, he is close to Hiram. Where Eli Crum is totally 2 to 3 pages separated from the 3 men of Hiram, Peter, and Elias. So again, I'm feeling stronger and stronger about Elias. My next step was then to go into 1860 census. And when I got into the 1860 census, I found the mortuary, the death record in 1860. And in this record in Tippa, we see that Eli Crum, age 53, place of birth is unknown. From March, he died. He was a farmer, he had pneumonia, and he had been sick for 4 days. So I found Eli Crum in this alternate census record. And when I went back and took a look at who it was connected to, he was connected to the family of William, which would have been his son, his wife Mary, Cleopatra, and Rachel. In 1850, this was what we had seen with Eli. So William had gotten married. There's 9 years of difference, but during that period of time, he got married. The fact that Rachel's named makes me think that maybe the mother had passed or was ill and he was naming the child. But Alan Ayers was the only thing on the administrator's bond. I did not find a probate. The only other record, I did not find Elias Crum in the 1860 census. So I went looking in those probate files, the administration files, and I did find an administration record from 1856 that was actually online. And it said that Elias Crum the state would be granted to Peter Crum upon his taking oath for $1,500. So that gives you a sense of the wealth of the man in 1856, with Hiram as the security. And these were recorded and in the state. And I felt really good about seeing that. I felt that that was an important piece, but I still wanted more if I could get more. And as it turned out, I had the opportunity to take a trip to Tippa as I was heading east for another visit. And I stopped in Tippa overnight. I went to the courthouse and told them what I was looking for, that I was looking for probates. And they sort of giggled and laughed and said, "You do know we were burned?" And I said, "Yes, but I keep hoping that maybe you've got some." And they said, "Well, you need to go to the jail." And I said, "Why do I need to go to the jail?" And they said, "Well, the old jail in town is now the archives, the county archives. And they do have some records from that time period because the courthouse wasn't big enough. And so we were moving boxes of stuff during that period of time to the jail." So I made an appointment at the jail and went and visited the woman and got to go into their safe and take a look for the probate. And I found the probate. It was 108 pages long. It was posted in 1866. So Civil War occurred between the time the man died and the end of the dealings of this probate. And I was able to get the 108 pages. Well, it tells me an awful lot. Number one, it lists all of the people that are part of the estate, including Fanny, his wife, and his children. Fanny was appointed guardian for Pinky and Nancy. But more importantly, it told me that the children sued their uncle, Peter Crum, because of the way he handled the estate. Elias was actually murdered at his mill, and that murder, as far as I can tell, has never been solved. Peter was given the rights as the administrator of the estate, he and Hiram, and he started working on this prior to the Civil War. There were a lot of debts to be collected. He was working on collecting those debts, and then the Civil War occurred. He had not completed his work. The Civil War started, the courthouse was burned down, they had to find another place. And when the Civil War was over, the money was no longer good. He had been collecting Confederate money, and now we were not dealing with Confederate money. And in essence, the children lost a lot of their estate. It looked like they lost a lot of their estate because of the transfer away from Confederate money. Peter won the suit, but in that lawsuit, Hiram, his brother, gives a full detailing of what he knew about his two brothers, and Hiram left town and went to Texas. It also talks about the children and who they are. And so it really was the final thing that helped to define for certain that Elias Crum that lived in the different censuses was the one. And obviously this is the correct family. Elizabeth was Pinky, was known as Pinky. And I found that out in the lawsuit. So this was not the right family. This was the correct family. I also found out that Elias's wife's maiden name was Kennedy. Peter Crum also married Isabella Kennedy, and they were the daughters of Joseph Kennedy, who lived next to them back in Tennessee. Other children were Jeanette Richardson, Elizabeth Richardson, Nancy Price. This second Joseph Kennedy Jr. was the one that moved to Mississippi. Fanny Crum, William Kennedy, and John Kennedy. And the Richardsons also moved. Now, they are not my husband's Richardsons, but it was fascinating ending up with some Richardsons in Mississippi at this time period. So it turned out we were able to prove easily both Elias and Hiram were the children. I will also tell you there was quite a rift between the families at that period of time that extends pretty much to today. The families of Peter and Elias rarely talk. Fortunately, there's enough generations that have gone by that they were curious, and a relative of Elias has got a hold of me because they'd heard I'd been in town and that my card got sent to them. And we've been able to now reintroduce cousins to cousins. So it's sort of a great ending to the story. So let's go on and look at another family. And this is the one out of Ohio. And in 1977, my mother started her genealogy research and her business back in 1943. I have over 500 letters that my mother wrote or people had written to my mother. And this one was in 1977, and it simply said in it, "I know you're working on the Fox family in Columbiana, Ohio. Can you untangle these 3 Fox men for me?" And you can see that they're all John. They're each living in a different township in Columbiana. And the number is the page number where the information was on them. At the time, I was not living at home, but my mother kept writing me and telling me about the work. And when I would visit, we would be off into courthouses, into cemeteries, talking to relatives to try to untangle these 3 individuals. One of the first things I know that she looked at was the census records, because they are noted in her research log. One John Fox, you can see, is only 16 to 25, but the other 2 are males 26 to 44. 2 of them have males under 10. This gentleman has 2 males under 10, and their wives are of similar ages as them. But again, we have a lot of children under 10. So one of the early things I looked at was the marriage records. The marriage records in Columbiana County are excellent for that early on. And I was really looking at who did they marry and where were they. I also made sure that I would list friends and family associates that were on the census. You can see that this John lived next to David Fox, while this one was close to Philip and Henry Fox. And this gentleman was close to Jacob, Peter, and Christopher Fox. Crumbaker, I just was laughing because I knew that this was a part of the report, but I was laughing that I found another Crum, but that time was something else added to it. So one of the first things I did is I found a map, and it becomes important. Columbiana County in 1820 does not look like the Columbiana County today. This is a map of the Columbiana County and its townships today. Mahoning was not in existence, so Columbiana extended north, and thus Beaver, which is now in Mahoning County, was actually in Columbiana County. And that becomes so important when you're doing work in this time period to try and understand the difference and the different locations. So one was in Beaver, one was in Salem, and one was in Hanover. And you can see the other counties that are close, and this happens to be Stark County right here. And so it's not unusual to say, well, where are the counties? This is Pennsylvania over here. So we were really trying to figure out who these individuals were. In order to solve it, we used a lot of different things, from the census records to the tax records, land deeds, probates and wills, marriages, church records, county histories, newspapers. Family Search Wiki is something you can use today, which is why I put it on there, but it was not existent. We did not have the internet back then. We were using the local locality guides that have been put together. We looked at their friends, we looked at neighbors and associates. We got maps of the area, in some cases much more detailed than you're seeing, that actually plots in each one of those townships where individuals were living. We looked at a lot of different cemeteries, and we contacted the local historical. What was interesting about this is none of these John Foxes is actually my direct John Fox, I should say. We knew of one John Fox already, but he had died before 1820. He had married a Mary Roller in 1805 in Columbiana. He died in 1818, and his will was fully probated in the courthouse, and we were able to find that will. He named his brother Philip Fox as the administrator. That is why we got this will. Philip Fox is a direct descendant of mine. Guardians were appointed for his 5 children, and you can see that the individuals were appointed were Rollers. They are brothers of Mary. Mary then remarried, and her daughters Nancy and Rachel actually married 2 of John Walter's sons. So you can imagine trying to sort that out. We did find this notice from an 1850 newspaper that John Fox, late of Hanover, deceased, that they were going to have an event at the house of Henry Fox Sr., adjoining the premises of the deceased. That was the first inkling we had that Henry was probably the father of John. And so it became an important clue for us down the road. But that's a story for another day. I will tell you that this is what this family looks like on my website, on my family tree. Henry being the father, and we've now got him confirmed. He had 2 sons. One is John and one is Philip. John married Mary Roller, who was the daughter of Balzer, who was the son of Jacob. And one of his other sons was John Roller, and they had a daughter, Sarah. And you can see how close in ages they were cousins. And Sarah married the other son of Henry. And Balzer's will names John and Mary Fox, Philip and Sarah Fox. Henry Fox, when he died, they had to sell the land, and it talks about the heirs of John Fox, and it has Philip and Sarah's handwriting. So they're my direct line, but this is why this man we already knew about. To make it even greater, so you understand why we were dealing with these John Foxes, I do have 12 John Foxes in my tree. I have 282 foxes in my tree. And just for the heck of it, I looked up on Find a Grave today, and 406 John Foxes are buried in Ohio. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. We were on foot doing our research when we were looking at these John Foxes. So let's take a look at John Fox number 1, the young man. We knew that he had to be reasonably married recently. We found one of the marriages that we found was Susanna Boston, and he married the 22nd of October, 1816. That would have given them time to have 2 children during that period of time. In looking through some cemetery books, which is what we used back then, we found that there was a Fox cemetery in Stark County, right across from Columbiana County. It's now called the St. Paul's Reformed Church. And in that, John Fox is listed, having died in 1865. And this is his wife, Susanna's tombstone. And these are pictures right now off of Find a Grave. I didn't take the time to, but I have original pictures that we had taken back when we went looking. What was interesting about this is when we went back to the census and tried to find David, my mom started, as she always did, to get a hold of cousins and other Fox relatives that she knew in the area and say, do any of you know this family? John and David would have been brothers. He married Susanna Boston. And we ended up having an individual that write us and say, yes, we're pretty sure that his father was a man by the name of Johann Michael Fox. Well, today, that father is listed in this as his father in the cemetery, and the wife of Hannah. The father died in 1821. So just after the 1820 census, John Fox's father died. But he only lists sons Abraham, Tobias, and Samuel. He does not list John. We don't know why he didn't list John. John didn't receive anything. John didn't purchase anything. Michael, we have since discovered, is a brother to Henry. But what really helped us was there were baptismal records for both Michael and Henry. And Michael and Henry also have 3 brothers, John, Peter, and Abraham. Well, that's not helping us with this John. But when we wrote to people, and I have letters, mother ended up finding a descendant of Michael that was through the son Tobias, one that was through Samuel, one that was through David, and one that was through Catherine. Each and every one of them sent back additional information to us about this family, such that we could figure out that Johann Michael Fuchs and his wife Hannah had 9 children. John Fox was born on the 12th of February in 1796. He was married the 22nd of 1816 to Susanna Boston. His twin sister, who was born the same day, married a Jacob Fox. And his older sister, who went by Mary, even though her baptism said Anna Maria, married another John Fox. But we were able to put together this information about this family, including David, be able to follow David, to understand who David was. And we were able to take a look then and find land records for John Fox up through his death in 1865, where he's mentioning his wife, Susanna. We were able to find her father, but it started really with a letter writing campaign that my mother did. And it says something even today about using Facebook and social media to be able to connect with people of the same name. Have you done research on this family? Do you know who they are? Can you tick off one of these people and let me know who it is? So we now have Henry Fox and John Fox from before. I've added Henry's father, who was known by Heinrich. He had 2 sons. This line shouldn't be here, but he had 2 sons. This one had a son, John Fox, who married Susanna Boston, and Michael Boston is her father. And so these individuals lived near each other, but you can see that Michael Fox was actually living with one of his sons, we believe at the time, because he's not enumerated as a separate individual in the 1820 census. But there is an older man living in one of the sons' homes. The second one was done a little bit differently. We were, in this case, finding John Fox in 1820 in Hanover Township, but there was no John Fox in Hanover Township in 1830. The closest man to that was a John Fox in Franklin Township. And when we went back and looked at the deeds, we were able to determine that they were one and the same. The John Fox in Hanover had moved to Franklin Township, not very far, but the ages of the children are probably correct in terms of what we knew about it. And so, again, we were fairly certain because of the young children that they would have been born, recently. And so we also were looking for his marriage and found it. And he married, lo and behold, Mary Agnes Roller. We've seen that name before, Roller name before. She is the daughter of John Roller and a sister to Sarah Roller, who is my relative. We have been able to we were able to determine a lot of the history because of the Roller connection. We had roller contacts from all the different children. This one happened to let us know that they had done research, and a daughter had died in Michigan, a son had died in Indiana, one daughter had married there, and she was living in Mahoning County and had passed. There are two more potential children that really haven't been resolved as well. One of those happens to be another John Fox as a child. But this research, again, came out of research that others had done, but it really came from the Roller side of the family, not from the Fox side of the family, and somewhat an interesting way of thinking about this family. And so if we take a look at this, all of the yellow you've seen, but John had this other daughter, Agnes Mary Roller. And this John Fox was known more often in paperwork and writing as Johannes. We still don't know where either of these individuals are buried. We feel fairly strongly that after 1830, they may have moved to either Indiana or Michigan and died in that area. That would make sense with the children that they had at the time, but we don't have any proof, and we have not necessarily found them at this point. They're not direct to my family, and so a little less important in terms of research that we have done. The final John was also 1820. In one of the record sets that we were using for all of these individuals, but we only found it with this one, was the record set, the military record set of the 1812. If this person was closer to the age of 44, they probably served then in the War of 1812. And in fact, this John Fox did. He applied for his pension, but this is actually a widow's pension. He received some bounty land, but this wonderful card from 1812 tells us not only when he married and what the maiden name was, and yes, we have a John Fox marrying a Mary Fox, but the day he died, October the 12th in 1849 in Indiana, which was where his bounty land was. And when the widow died, she came back to Ohio and lived with a son. So this immediately told us a lot of information about this family. We were able to put it together. It made sense. He was there both in 1820 and in 1830, and then he moved to Ripley at that point in time. Her information in 1871, when she applied for the War of 1812, has pages and pages and pages that were found online today at Fold 3. They wouldn't have been available to us as easily before. And in fact, we did take a trip to NARA back when you got to go in and use their microfiche and go into the room. And we were able to see this. And although this piece today is a copy from Fold 3, back then we were actually at NARA and found this information on the third individual. So it turns out that John and Jacob Fox are sons of Christopher. And Christopher left a will in 1823. He left a will and he named his sons Peter, Jacob, and John. And John Fox married Anna Marie, known as Mary Fox, and Jacob Fox married Anna. And we had seen those names earlier on that list of John Michael Fox. And so it puts it all together. If I take a look at this overall, this is what this information looks like. Everything that is in red is a direct ancestor to me. Everything that is also on this is already on my tree. So all of John Roller's kids, even Agnes Mary, even though she's my non-direct, in this day and age, I have this connection on my tree. That was number 2. Number 1 was John Fox and Susanna Boston. I have those because Henry and Michael were brothers. And then Michael had 2 other children, of which they married sons of Christopher Fox. We still don't know who the father is of Christopher Fox. And again, it's not my direct line. I haven't spent a lot of time hunting that down, just like I haven't spent a lot of time hunting John Fox's down. But we were able, it took, to be honest with you, the letter back. My mother got the letter in 1977, and the letter back to the gentleman was in 1980. So it took about 3 years, pre-computers, to be able to do this kind of research and to be able to figure it out. And for fun, I thought I would mention that John Fox and Susanna Boston, their 7th child, they named John Fox Jr. Johannes Fox and Mary Agnes, their 2nd child, was named John Fox Jr. And of course, Philip had to get into it with Sarah, and they named their 4th child John Fox. Don't forget that Michael and Henry had a brother, John Fox, and their brother Peter also had a son, John Fox. So you can get an idea why John Fox is in my tree so many times. So let's wrap up and look at a couple things. One, I want you to think about creating a timeline, looking at different kinds and types of records. So often we get into the habit as genealogists using the same things over and over and over again. Here, this is a case where you want to use different records. You've seen church records, you've seen cemetery records. There's a lot of different records that we have seen too. Pay attention to the spellings, understand about them. They are important to understand. The spelling of that last name could be different. Pinpoint your locations by using maps and deeds. Collect signatures as needed so you can tell the difference. The John Foxes, all 3 of them did not write out their name. They used a mark. Unfortunately, those marks were not definitive and didn't help with the research we were doing here. Find your originals, look at your fan club as you're doing it. Remember that families traveled together. In the Roller family, they came out of Pennsylvania. 4 of the children went to Columbiana County, 4 stayed in Huntington County, Pennsylvania, and 1 went to Fairfax County, Ohio. Naming convention, names are passed down very often. Pay attention to that. In my own family, I've got 13 different varieties how you spell Kaufman as my maiden name, and they're all in my tree. Think about a comparative table. I've used this many times where as I put 3 census together, I might put 3 different men of the same name together and try and figure out, am I looking at 1 man, 2 men, 3 men, or something very different? Follow the children. Often the children, their death certificates might give you better information than your own direct ancestors. I say don't make assumptions. You can make hypotheses and then go back and prove those hypotheses, but don't make an assumption and then do a lot of research and make the assumption that it's correct. Use a research log, know what you've researched, continue to research new things. Start broad and then narrow as you go. Search records, become familiar with the locality, and understand to break families down, to figure out for certain that you have proof of who individuals are. You're going to need to do exhaustive research. I'm in the process right now for another client. I am researching the name of Martin in Pennsylvania. The belief was that he served for the Civil War. Well, there were 9 Martin Hesses that served in the Civil War. I today can say that none of those that served in the Civil War is my Martin Hess, at least not those men in Pennsylvania. The man lived in the southwestern corner of Pennsylvania. So I'm now looking at Martin Hesses that served out of West Virginia, out of Maryland, and out of Ohio, and trying to find if any of those are the correct Martin Hess. I have a Martin Hess that married, had 2 children, and was gone before the 1870 census. The belief is that he probably might have served in the Civil War, but we have yet to find out. It's taking time to do that research, and you need to do it logically, and you need to think it through and be very specific about what you're looking for. I hope today gave you some ideas on what you can do and where you can find your people. And with that, I will stop sharing. And Kate, I think we probably can do questions.
We do have a couple questions for you. So the first one says, I've been researching 2 men who it turns out appear to be the same person. She says, initially, I discounted this as their parents were cousins. She says she's done a timeline. So, the question is, at one point do you declare them one and the same? She's hesitant because of the close family relationships.
Right. That's always a difficult piece because many times we think we have two different individuals and we then find out we don't. My recommendation to you is to start writing it. Actually start to write the proof. I find many times when I start writing the proof, trying to say this is one person, all of a sudden I get to I get to something that I found and it doesn't make sense. For example, being in the 1860s, in one state, and then suddenly we're buying and selling land in another location. That doesn't make sense because of distance and how they would have traveled, right? And so suddenly you have to say, oops, maybe not. Maybe it is two men, and I just don't have very many records on that other person. But I find writing it would be my recommendation as the next step to go to. Can you write the proof and have somebody else read it to say, you're right, I agree, they're both the same individual?
So for our next question, somebody is researching a woman, and it's she was born in the 1830s, but there are about 3 women with the same name in the same area at that time. So do you have any tips on researching her to kind of see
Yeah.
who she belongs to?
Yeah, women are the most difficult when it's the same name. And I ran into with my Rebecca King. They become even more because very rarely will you find a name in a deed. They're the wife of a man, right? And often their last name. So I recommend that you try to see if you can find the wills of the parents, right, for these women. Often in those wills, they will list my daughter, Anna, the wife of so-and-so, right? And at that period of time, the women weren't entitled really to be getting anything. So it would be going to the man. I have one case where it's literally, well, Philip Fox is the best example. Sarah could not get the stuff from her father because it wouldn't have gone to her. So Philip is the one that is mentioned in John Roller's information. Philip is the one that is the heir, even though Philip Fox isn't the heir, it's his wife, Sarah. So I would first see if you can figure out who might be the parents of that. That means doing a little bit broader research, but if you've got a last name, start to see if that helps you at all. That would be one way of doing it. The second way is looking at the children to see if in their marriage records or in their death records or in birth records, birth registers. So it's not going to be in certificates. It's going to be in death registers or birth registers, whether or not the family, the parents are listed. In some states, depending on where you're researching, sometimes parents are listed in those registers. And so doing some of that kind of work might also be useful.
This person is asking, what did you use for the Roller/Fox family chart with the arrows? How did you create that?
I used my PowerPoint. I added squares and I created it on my own, right in PowerPoint.
Okay.
I did not use Lucidchart. I am a Lucidchart user, but I know I was going to be changing this presentation as I was coming around. So I just decided to do it the old fashioned way and create it right in PowerPoint with squares and text boxes.
That sounds good. Thank you. I just wanted to mention that if anybody has any additional questions, please send us an email at genealogy@acpl.info. And also, if you would like a copy of the chat from today's presentation, send us an email and we'll get that to you as well. And thank you again, Emily, for presenting. We really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for attending. And I hope you all have a good night.